Hey guys, John Ribs here, coming at you with another Spire side chat. Today I'm going to be looking at my Ascension 20 victories on Silent over the course of the last almost 2 months now. I haven't looked through all of these decks yet, so we're gonna sort of see what happens, because Silent decks can get pretty complicated and it can be sort of difficult to work out exactly what they're doing that's strong sometimes. So I'm just gonna try to give you a clear idea of how a run came to be, why it won, and see if there are any specific lessons to be taken away from it. Starting with a really easy one, this is a Dead Branch run. Dead Branch, up there with Kunai, I would say, in the conversation for what the most strong relic in the game is. Dead Branch is just immensely powerful. And this deck takes advantage of it in a couple of really obvious ways. This deck has 3 copies of Backstab Plus in it, so we have 45 damage on turn 1. We also get 3 random cards in our hand, and those cards will be really good sometimes. Sometimes they'll be 0-cost cards with Exhaust, and we'll have even more stuff. We'll get, for example, a Adrenaline off one of the backstabs, and Adrenaline's going to give us another energy, draw another 3 cards rather than 2 cards, because it's giving us a random card as well. So that's basically what this run is. That's like already pretty much enough to win the run. We got 2 copies of Blade Dance Plus, 2 copies of Cloak and Dagger Plus to get us even more stuff going on. Our deck's ability to block is a little bit tenuous. Shout out to Endless Agony as well, is another card which is just okay. A lot of people ask me, like, what's the deal with Endless Agony? Do you discard it sometimes to try to make your deck have lots of Endless Agonies or something? And, like, for the most part, in most situations, this card deals 8 damage for 0 energy. It's like a better version of Slice, and you just play it the first time you draw it, and in most fights, that's the most that you're going to get out of it. But what Endless Agony has is an immense number of interactions with relics that Silent can have and powers that Silent can have. For example, if you have 1,000 cuts, this is a card which you draw and then you play 2 cards, so it procs 1,000 cuts twice. If you have Kunai or Shuriken, this is 2 attacks in a turn instead of 1 attack in a turn. If you have Dead Branch, this is going to give you 2 different cards. If you have Hovering Kite, you're going to draw this, you're going to have 2 cards in hand because of it, which means that when you have to discard 2 cards for Hovering Kite, you may just choose to discard both of the Endless Agonies, and then you get 4 other cards to play for your turn. So, Endless Agony, shout out to that card, is just a consistent overperformer as a card which looks sort of confusing and not that incredible, but yeah, that's what it's doing here. Yeah, the deck's like not that incredible at blocking or anything at face value. It's got 1 footwork plus in it. It doesn't have any apparition at all. It's funny, people asked me if it was possible to beat Ascension 20 without apparition after my first like 5 wins, because a lot of them had apparition or Intangible, either apparition or Wraith form in them. And I remember being like, yeah, but I'm not sure that I've done one yet, and it turns out the first run I had didn't have apparition, but it did have Dead Branch, so that's making this deck extremely strong. It's hard to talk about what the cards do, because every fight that you play, you're going to have a bunch of different cards in this deck because of what Dead Branch is giving you. I will say that After Image and Infinite Blades, both upgraded, are immensely good with Dead Branch. The only drawback that Dead Branch can have is that it can just whiff a lot. It's really hard to, because there aren't very many bad cards in this game. If you're getting random cards from the Silent Pool, most of them are really good. And it's become more and more true as the game has been developed more and more. A lot of the changes made to the game, and I don't actually like this very much, but a lot of the changes that have been made to the game have been making the bad cards into good cards, and a lot of the feedback that gets given about the game is like, here's this bad card, what about if we changed it in this way so that it was good? And I mean, I think that making every card good sort of has negative effects on the game, and one of the things that it does is it makes Dead Branch just more and more extremely strong and have very little downside. Doesn't end up being a very double-edged relic when every card that you can exhaust into is a playable good card. This deck took Flechettes on floor 1. That's interesting. Flechette's Cloak and Dagger Backstab. Can be pretty interesting to see how Silent ends up having enough damage for the first elite. And it looks like we had to take an elite on floor 6 without a campfire in this run. So we just took Flechette's because it was the only card there that dealt damage. And killing Gremlin Knob or Lagavulin at Ascension 20, you're not going to succeed at that without cards which deal damage. So Flechette's Cloak and Dagger Backstab. Just taking the highest damage card, basically, on every floor. Bought a Strength Potion and a Skewer as well. And that got us a Toxic Egg, and then we got to upgrade and neutralize, and got a Dead Branch on floor 8. And from there, the run's pretty much done. Took 7 damage against the Awakened one, and 2 damage against Donu Deka. A lot of people also expect a deck like this to have trouble against Time Eater. It doesn't. A deck like this does not have trouble against Time Eater. Okay. Next up, this run has Kunai. This run definitely has Kunai. We did have to get all the way through into Act 2 before we picked up a Kunai, but Kunai is like how this deck can block to survive long enough to win the fight against our Act 3 enemies. Took 19 damage over 17 turns against Awakened 1, and 22 damage over 7 turns against Donu Deka. Ended the run on 18 hit points, so cutting it sort of close for comfort. We took an Endless Agony, again just 8 damage for 0 energy on floor 1, a Poison Stab, a Cloak and Dagger, so I guess with the Poison Stab and the Endless Agony I thought that I was at a point where I could afford a Cloak and Dagger over a Slice. Cloak and Dagger is a very good common, Slice is a very bad common, so certainly if you think you have enough damage in your deck you want to be taking Cloak and Daggers, not Slices. Bought a Pen Nib at a store, cool. Upgrade, neutralize, and then we got an Orichalcum from an elite and sort of went from there. So yeah, that's enough to get us through Act 1. Bought a Footwork and a Deadly Poison as well to help with our boss fight against Hexaghost, and got 1,000 cuts from there. And the spot that this run takes off for sure is when we open Kunai from this chest. Looks like we were struggling through Act 2 prior to that. Well, it's weird actually. We were doing pretty well in fights in Act 2, but we took a ton of damage for Cursed Tome to get our Enchiridion, which is an okay relic, but not a particularly great one. But yeah, once we have Kunai, we're just trying to play 3 attacks every turn. Endless Agony helps toward that. Skewer is actually a helpful card toward that, because you can play it for 0. It doesn't deal any damage, but it will proc Kunai. Get 3 copies of Cloak and Dagger. We eventually got an Apotheosis to upgrade all this stuff, and that makes the deck strong enough to power through fights. Runic Pyramid plus Ice Cream's pretty nice as a combination of relics. Ice Cream's a strong relic, right? But it struggles if you can't really do anything better than spend 4 energy a turn on the cards you drew. In this run, we had 4 energy per turn, but at least we had a Runic Pyramid, so if we drew a bunch of defends and weren't getting attacked, we could just pass the turn, hold on to our defends, and have extra energy from Ice Cream, and get some value that way. The deck deals damage mostly with 1,000 cuts plus, which is an okay but not incredible power for dealing damage. I don't know why this deck has a Doppelganger in it. That's sort of weird to me. I don't immediately see where I got that. I used to try to make Discovery better toward the beginning of my Ascension 20 runs. I've sort of changed my mind on Discovery. I don't think it's really worth going after almost ever anymore. It just doesn't give good enough cards often enough. Okay, here's another run. Let's try to work out why this one won. This is certainly a pile of cards. Certainly a pile of cards. Anytime your deck has Well-Laid Plans in it, the power level of the deck goes massively up. This is a card which you might not think is incredible when you're starting out playing Silent, but the ability to hold 1 card until next turn, like hold the best block card in your hand, hold a Backflip Plus, so that it's pretty impossible to draw a hand with Backflip Plus in it and then have a bad turn. it's really, really difficult. So if you just hold the backflip plus, it's really hard to not end up with something useful to do on the next turn, because you're able to draw more cards and you're guaranteed to have a little bit of block. We got a finisher off floor 1, just some early damage, a backstab off floor 2 for more early damage, Shining Light and Ominous Forge get us a bunch of upgrades going on. Ominous Forge is a relatively new event which gives you Warped Tongs and a copy of Pain, which we got to remove at the Merchant on floor 5. Pain is a terrible curse, but Warped Tongs at the start of your turn, upgrade a random card in your hand for the rest of combat, is a very nice relic. And so that gets us to a point where our deck is already pretty high value. Oh, we got a glass knife from the whale bonus, I guess. It doesn't show you what the whale bonus is, but it looks like we got a glass knife, so we had that as well. That's a lot of early game damage. And so that gets us to a point where we're dealing lots of early game damage. Got a Mercury Hourglass as well on floor 9 for more damage. And, I mean, that's sort of the deck through Act 2. Silent really needs to do something impressive to beat Act 2 Holy Fights. For the Ironclad runs, I wasn't talking a whole lot about how the cards that I got enabled me to beat Act 2 Holy Fights, but Silent will actually die to those pretty regularly. So noting that, like, yeah, we got some very strong upfront damage, which works well. That's a big deal for Silent. Did we take Vampires? We did take Vampires, so we had Bite for a little bit of sustain. Fought a Book of Stabbing. How on earth did we not die to Book of Stabbing? That's impressive. Was that? Oh, this is before Book of Stabbing got the massive buff, so it was actually just like it was in Ascension 15 at that point, basically. Pretty easy fight. All right, so this deck, the other really strong thing that this deck eventually got, I guess, is Pocket Watch. Pocket Watch might not stand out as a particularly strong relic later in the game, especially in a deck with Cloak and Daggers. If you play 3 or fewer cards during your turn, you draw 3 additional cards at the start of your next turn. I think people look at relics which can have a constant effect and evaluate them based on, like, if that effect gets turned off, the relic must be bad. Like, people look at Runic Dodecahedron and see that a lot of the time the effect gets turned off. Runic Dodecahedron gains you an energy every turn if you're at full health, but a lot of the time you're not at full health, so the effect gets turned off, so they think it's a bad relic. But actually, Runic Dodecahedron is, like, pretty fine. Like, that's gonna get you 1 energy after campfires. It's gonna get you 1 or 2 energy in boss fights. Compare that to Lantern, which gets you 1 energy on the start of every turn, and, like, it's fine, it's okay. Pocket Watch is a relic where you only need this relic to go off once, and it's already one of the stronger relics in the game. Like, in each fight, you only need this to go off once for it to be really, really good. If you draw 3 additional cards off a relic in a fight, that is a damn good relic. And so, you know, you're just looking for some turn where you can play 3 or less cards. And I think this deck, despite having some Cloak and Daggers and stuff like that, and wanting to spam cards sometimes, was able to play 3 or fewer cards, like 2 or 3 times in a lot of fights. So we have some pretty strong card interactions going on. Phantasmal Killer, next turn your attacks deal double damage, plus something like Finisher and Well-Laid Plans, or Skewer. That's a pretty strong thing to be able to do. Corpse Explosion is a very, very, very powerful card just in its own right. This is one of the strongest cards that Silent has. Dealing a ton of AoE damage when killing a lower health enemy is a really big deal. So this, like, solves your triple bird cultist fight. It does a hell of a lot of work against something like Gremlin Leader. It solves your slavers fight. It's very good against the 2 orb walkers. This is just a ridiculously powerful Silent card. It's an example of a card which used to be bad and then got made good, and now it's ridiculous. Very strong card. But yeah, in general, this is like a pile of Silent cards. I don't really know what to tell you. A lot of Silent decks just end up sort of being piles of cards, and one of the reasons that you end up with piles of cards is that Silent gets a lot of staying power in fights after deploying powers. So this deck has an Envenom, a Footwork Plus, an Infinite Blades, 2 copies of Noxious Fumes, a Well-Laid Plans. And once you have all of those powers in play, your deck starts to do a lot more. It starts to output a lot more damage every turn. It starts to be able to craft its turns better. But the problem is, if I have like an 18 card deck and I put those 6 powers in my deck, my first 3 turns are going to be just absolutely atrocious, because I'm going to average like 2 powers drawn every turn, and I only get 4 energy and 5 cards every turn, and so I'm going to like be trying to put everything into drawing my powers, or I'm going to draw them and not play them and then have to draw them again later, in which case it's costing me more cards drawn per power. And so a lot of the time, Silent's pretty happy to just have a massive deck so that you get to have lots of powers in your deck, but you're drawing lower average number of powers per turn. And that's something I would say that this deck shows off quite a lot. We have 40 cards, and a lot of them are just sort of filler cards, which are fine. Dodge and Roll's very good block, Backflip's very good block, Cloak and Dagger's perfectly good, Piercing Wail's very good block, Leg Sweep's very good block. So we've got a lot of like filler cards which are just keeping us alive pretty well. And one of the main things that does is let us have more powers in our deck, so our deck scales up more. I'm sort of curious which bosses this deck beat and how it did against them. Beat Donu Daka taking 16 damage over 6 turns and Time Eater taking 41 damage. I'm not sure that this deck would have beaten Awakened One at all. So this is a deck which I think the run went down to the absolute wire, and I wouldn't be surprised if you gave me this deck on floor 49 and told me to win the run with 42 max HP. I'd be like, how many tries do I get? Because I would not feel confident that I was going to pull that off the first time at all. Corpse Explosion's a really big deal for the Donu Deka fight. Without Corpse Explosion, we probably don't win this run, because it would have ended the Donu Deka fight probably 3+ turns sooner. Okay, this is the first absolutely bonkers Silent run that we've looked at. This deck has 3 copies of Wraith Form Plus and a Kunai. Gain 3 Intangible. At the end of your turn, lose 1 Dexterity. So just with rare cards that we picked up, we have 9 turns of invulnerability in this deck. Our deck isn't anywhere near as good at dealing damage as some Ironclad decks can be in Slay the Spire, so 9 turns of invulnerable doesn't actually like solve all of your problems for you. But on top of that, and I remember this run, on top of that we have a Kunai, which means that the fact that we lose 1 Dexterity at the end of each turn from playing these Wraith forms is actually mitigated somewhat because we're gaining so much Dexterity. And this was a really, really fun run to play, because our damage really never got there. We've got like a Noxious Fumes plus, an Infinite Blades plus, but we don't like have a Shuriken. There's no plus strength here, so we're playing like lots of cards with Blade Dances and Cloak and Daggers, but they're just giving us Kunai procs. They're not giving us all that much damage. And yeah, we went to 1 HP against Time Eater with this deck, because we just could not kill Time Eater fast enough. It took us 22 turns to win the fight against Time Eater, and Time Eater is getting a massive amount of strength from all of the cards that we're playing, and we're trying to block with Kunai, and then we have 9 turns of Intangible, and we had to use those at like strategic times throughout the fight. It wasn't like we had 9 turns of Intangible and then Time Eater was dead. So we went to 1 HP off the Time Eater fight, and then 1 Awakened One in 24 turns, taking no damage. I think I played one of the Wraith forms on like turn 7 or something in that fight, and then had to keep up with the dex loss with Kunais and everything, and it came right down to the final turn. This was an incredible run to play. The run also had Paper Crane, so if we were able to weaken enemies, they were dealing less damage to us. But I don't think I took a Sucker Punch plus. I think I took that really late because I didn't see any weak like anywhere in the run. This deck started out with Footwork, which is, I think, a good enough card to usually be taking over a damage source early for Silent. Quick Slash for some damage, and I took an Escape Plan. I guess I had a Ghost in a Jar at that point. I'm not sure if I had, like, extra potions or something. Escape Plan's a bit of a risky pickup because it's so bad against Gremlin Knob. We fought the Sentries, though. Also got to buy a Dash and a Deadly Poison, which gets us to a point where we're beating elites pretty comfortably. Got a Kunai on floor 9 and went from there. Yeah, this was a really, really fun run. this is the sort of run which which made me absolutely fall in love with Ascension 20, because I would just not have gotten to do something like this ever on Ascension 15. I mean, there's only one boss fight on Ascension 15, so you're never going to start a boss fight at 1 HP, really. Oh, wait. So this is a Nightmare Wraith form Pyramid deck. Doesn't have Apotheosis. We got a Fusion Hammer, so we never got to upgrade our Wraith form. This wasn't the one with Tongs? Okay. This deck is like pretty similar to the last deck, actually. 19 damage, 41 damage. A lot of silent decks end up centering mitigation around Wraith form because it's such a bonkers powerful card. It's very dissatisfying for me as a player because it's often very boring. And this deck has Runic Pyramid and Nightmare and Wraith form, so all this deck has to do is hold its Wraith form until it draws Nightmare as well, then Nightmare the Wraith form, then start playing Wraith forms. This adds 3 copies of the card into your hand, so that gets us 8 turns of Intangible, even though Wraith form's not upgraded. And then it just has to deal some damage. So this deck has 3 copies of Noxious Fumes to ensure that it can deal damage quickly. Corpse Explosion and Envenom. That's enough to get us through 14 turns, 10 turns against the boss fights. It'd take a little bit of damage. Came close to dead against Onudeka, but this looks a lot closer than I imagine it was. Because it would have been like I was at 50 health or whatever, and then there's a turn where I'm getting attacked for a lot, and I have a Wraith form and Nightmare in play, and I'm like, okay, I'll take 30 more damage and then be invincible for the rest of the fight. So, you know, go down to 18, but not actually ever be in any danger of dying. Took a Dagger Spray, Sucker Punch plus Steroid Potion, Backstab. Bought an early Well-Laid Plans, very, very nice purchase. Upgraded the Sucker Punch over the Neutralize. Sucker Punch upgrade gets you a little bit extra damage over the Neutralize upgrade. This goes from 7 to 9. Whereas Neutralize only upgrades from 3 to 4. So if you're going to be playing your Sucker Punch every time you draw it, you'd generally rather be upgrading Sucker Punch over Neutralize. Yeah, just sort of went from there with the Noxious Fumes from the Sentries. Beat Slime Boss taking 13 damage. Noxious Fumes is one of the best cards you can have for the Slime Boss fight. Slime Boss fight is very challenging to beat consistently as silent, but Noxious Fumes just being persistent damage that applies after the Slime Boss splits, it really speeds up your clock in the fight, so very useful to have. Fought 3 Act 2 elites, sure. Yeah, mostly though, this is just Wraith form Nightmare, plus like some cards that deal damage in an okay way, and enough damage to get through the start of the run. Okay, so this is an Apparitions run with Pyramid to hold our Apparition Plus for the most important turn. We did have a Nightmare as well, which is another 3 Apparitions, so that's 8 turns of Intangible. Ugh. There's just so little I can say to make that like super interesting. Like, yeah, we're invincible for 8 turns every fight, and you know, we do an okay job of dealing some damage in that time. We got a Finisher plus a Well-Laid Plans plus, which actually was irrelevant because we picked up a Pyramid. But until we picked up the Pyramid, we had the Well-Laid Plans plus, and then Finisher plus is very, very strong with Pyramid. I thought this deck had Infinite Blades, like I said, Cloak and Daggers. Something we can do here is you can just hold Shivs in your hand. So you can like play Cloak and Dagger plus to block 1 turn, and then hold Finisher plus 4 Shivs, draw 5 more cards the next turn, and then just play any of the attacks that you drew that turn, play your 4 Shivs, play your Finisher, and deal a ton of damage. And this is a pretty common engine for Silent to deal damage with. I remember when I was first playing around with stuff on Spire logs and comparing my win rates for cards with the population and trying to work out whether I liked how it was rating cards or not, the package of Finisher, Flechettes, and Skewer for me on Silent were the cards which were performing for me more well than the population compared to all the other cards. Like, the population was losing an awful lot of runs with Finisher, Flechettes, and Skewer, and I was like winning an awful lot of runs with Finisher, Flechettes, and Skewer. So maybe a valuable thing for an average player would be to look at how cards like Finisher, Flechettes, and Skewer are fitting into my decks. So in this deck, for example, this isn't a deck which has like infinite shiv spam, and maybe that's what you're thinking. Maybe that's what a lot of players are thinking when they think of Finisher. They're thinking like Finisher is all about my deck plays 8 shivs a turn, so I want a Finisher. That's not what Finisher's doing in this deck at all, though. This deck is trying to craft like 1 turn per every 5 or 6 turns, where Finisher's very, very good, and it's using well-laid plans to make that happen. And then it just plays Finisher on that 1 turn every 6 or 7 turns. And the other turns, it's like deploying powers, blocking, playing its apparitions, of course, stuff like that. Sucker Punch, Masterful Stab over Sucker Punch. Masterful Stab has been reworked somewhat recently. If you haven't picked up the game in the last like month or 2, you may not have seen this rework to the card. Costs 1 additional energy for each time you lose HP this combat, deal 12 damage. So it's sort of like a backstab. It's an okay card, especially early in the run. It can become a liability later when fights start to get longer, but Silent, again, just needs so much help killing stuff. You take a Skewer over a well-laid plans on floor 4. I'm surprised that I did that. I wonder if I'm missing some of the story, like I don't know exactly what my whale bonus was and stuff like that. Okay. Anyway, this deck is mostly just apparitions. 2 damage over 7 turns against Donu Deca. 20 damage over 12 turns against Time Eater. Sure, like, yeah. It's just apparitions being immensely good at blocking. Okay. So this is an Envenom ×2, actually, Snecko's Skull deck. Envenom deals... Whenever an attack deals unblocked damage, you apply 1 poison, and Snecko's Skull, whenever you apply poison, apply an additional 1 poison. So this combination of relic and card ends up applying 2 poison every time you hit something with an attack, which can be very strong for a Silent deck, which might hit enemies with a lot of attacks, or might hit enemies with the same attack multiple times, like with this Riddle with Holes Plus. Hits 5 times, which applies 10 poison. This deck got an Astral Leap and a Cursed Key after, I guess, limping through Act 2, taking no elite fights. Taking quite a bit of damage as well. Oh, it has Career. Oh, that's funny. Oh, there's a clip from this run on my channel. Yeah, where we walked into a store, and the way that Career works is that there's 1 slot in the store which is for powers, and every time you buy something in the store, the slot gets restocked, so we got to buy 3 Footworks because it restocked with Footwork 2 times in a row and started with Footwork. And getting 3 copies of Footwork into this deck is a large part of why it's able to block enough to survive end bosses. 34 damage against Awaken 1, 7 damage against Time Eater. Awaken 1's going to be the tougher fight there because Awaken 1 buffs off powers, and Time Eater is just going to be a bit of a joke. When you have 3 copies of Footwork, your blocks are just blocking for so much. Yeah, the damage profile of the deck is centered largely around the Envenom, stacking up poison. We've got some Crippling Clouds to try stacking that poison on top. Poison is a type of damage which gets better and better the more of it you have. And so we don't actually have that much of it. There's no Noxious Fumes in the deck, for example, but we've got the Envenoms and the Crippling Clouds, and that's enough to get us there. Took a Quick Slash as our damage choice over Sucker Punch. I like how Quick Slash scales later into the game over Sucker Punch. Sucker Punch is a pretty bad card in Act 3, whereas Quick Slash I'm generally pretty happy to have in Act 3. Dodge and Roll over Slice. I think Dodge and Roll is a strong enough card that we probably are pretty happy to take it over Slice early. We got the Serpent Head. Wait, no, this is the Serpent, sorry. This is an event which gives us a bunch of gold, but we get a curse, right? I'm confused. Did we get the curse or not? Did I remove the thing there? I'm confused. Whatever. A Dagger Throw, upgrade or down neutralize and fought some sentries. Obtained Snecko Skull at the store, so I actually bought that from the store. Is that despite not having a Noxious Fumes or any poison yet? Wow. I wonder if that was just like a very bad store or what. Oh no, this is a treasure, not a store. I'm sorry, I'm an idiot. So we opened that in a treasure. Sure. Got the career and got the Envenom off the elite fight right after we'd picked up the skull. So just straight away we've got the Snecko skull and the Envenom combination to get really good damage in. Piercing Whale's a hugely important card for surviving Act 2. It's very good in a lot of the Act 2 hallway fights and against all 3 of the Act 2 elites. So worth pointing out that we got a Piercing Whale. Generally, Piercing Whale's not a very good card in Act 1. So generally in Act 1, if I'm worried about dying in Act 1, I'm not going to be taking Piercing Whales. But then once I'm confident that I can beat Gremlin Knob and Lagavulin and stuff like that, I'm going to start taking Piercing Whale over a lot of pretty good cards because it's so good in Act 2. And Silent decks usually aren't sitting there thinking, oh, Act 2 is going to be so easy. Act 2 is really difficult. really, really difficult. Alright, cool. So we got a Paper Crane as well for more mitigation. But yeah, this is mostly just a pile of cards with that Envenom, Snecko Skull synergy for lots of damage, and 3 footworks for mitigation. Here's a Shuriken deck. Shuriken decks are really interesting. Kunai decks are sort of boring, because like you put Cloak and Daggers in and you block forever and you never die. But Shuriken decks often end up racing, because Shuriken's immense scaling for you, right? But it doesn't scale your block. So you may not actually be surviving long enough to take advantage of your strength scaling with Shuriken. I think that it's a slightly worse relic than Kunai in terms of like win rate for the way that I play the game. It's still very, 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 very good. And by slightly, I mean like only 2 or 3% worse. They do very similar things in that they reward you for playing 3 attacks every turn by having you win any fight in the game. It's just that Shuriken has this rough patch where you know, dealing 200 damage to an enemy with 250 health doesn't actually do anything. The enemy still attacks you just as hard. So having more strength in that situation doesn't mean that you don't die. Whereas against an enemy with 250 health with Kunai, at that point in the fight you might have only dealt 100 damage, but you already have, you know, 5 dexterity or something, which means that you're not dying to the enemy anymore. So there's that rough middle point where sometimes Shuriken can be worse than Kunai. The flip side is that against enemies who put statuses in your deck, Shuriken can be better than Kunai, because like Kunai doesn't do anything if you draw 5 burns for your turn and none of them are block cards, whereas Shuriken could have ended the fight already by dealing more damage for you. Overall, they're like very similarly powerful relics for sure. So in this one, we actually skipped Sneaky Strike, Deflect, Riddle with Holes. Deflect's usually a very strong card, but not something that I want in my deck early in Act 1 when Gremlin Knob might happen. Sneaky Strike is not very good damage. Riddle with Holes is not very good damage either. And I guess we felt confident that we could see some damage with some more hallway fights. Deadly Poison's very good damage. Deadly Poison ×2 is very good damage ×2. And then Dagger Throw, cool. Updated Neutralize, killed Lagavulin, which I think is the easiest elite fight for us with the 2 Deadly Poisons, although we took 34 damage. You're not seeing my losses, but a lot of silent runs just lose to like Act 1 elites or Act 2 hallway fights. I'm winning about 50% on my Ascension 20 silent runs, but it's like the losses that I get are like Act 1 elites, Act 2 hallway fights and elites, Act 1 boss, Act 2 boss, and Act 3 bosses, and that's about like 10% each. Like, silent dies in a way that's pretty nicely spread out throughout the run, I would say. Haven't been dying a whole lot in Act 3 hallway fights or elite fights, but yeah. Took 21 damage against Awakened 1, 0 damage against Donundaka, fought Hexaghost. Alright, cool. So yeah, this is a Shuriken deck. We picked up a Malaise. Malaise is an immensely powerful card against Awakened 1 and Time Eater, and against a lot of the Act 2 enemies. And yeah, anytime that you have a Malaise, like your ability to beat Act 3 bosses like doubles or something. It's super ridiculous how powerful that card is. We got a Paper Crane. We also got a membership card, which is fun. Membership card has been nerfed. It used to give you more stores in future acts as well. When I played this run, it was giving more stores in future acts as well. So not only does it get you a 50% discount on all products, which starts happening immediately. So if you walk into a store with 400 gold, buy a membership card for 200 gold, the remaining 200 gold you have like buys as much as 400 gold would have. But it also gets you safe floors through Act 2 and stuff. And taking stores as safe floors is a bit double-edged, because in this game you do want every floor to increase the strength of your deck. If you can do it without dying, you want to be taking the hardest floor every single floor, so that your deck gets stronger and stronger as rapidly as possible. But realistically, like, sometimes Silent's going to die in Act 2 if you do that, so having the extra stores is sort of nice. We got a Paper Grain, which is great. Most of these are not particularly relevant relics. I took an oddly strange spoon because I got apparitions, and yeah, this deck it ends up as an apparition plus Shuriken deck. Strange spoon's a bit double-edged when you have shivs, because it makes it so the shivs don't exhaust, but this deck was actually fine with that and was able to beat the bosses, like drawing a bunch of shivs on turn like 7 through 13 or whatever. A decent amount of the draws were just shivs which had been shuffled back into the deck because of Strange Spoon, but they were dealing so much damage because of Shuriken that it didn't matter. I'm going to try to speed up a little bit. Silent runs are harder for me to talk about than Ironclad runs, and I don't want this to go much over an hour. So this time we got an Endless Agony, Dagger Spray, Caltrops, Dripping Cloud. Let's talk about Caltrops a little bit as an early pickup. Caltrops is not very good in Act 1 at all. It's great against Hexaghost and Guardian, and this time we did have Hexaghost, but it's not good at all at getting you to them. It's not good against any of the elites. We took Sentries, Gremlin Knob, and Lagavulin in this fight. Caltrops is a card that I am really happy to add to my deck because of how good it is in Act 2. It's good in Act 2 for the same reasons that Piercing Wail and Malaise are good in Act 2. But I'm not going to take it early in Act 1 if I feel like I'm very likely to die to a Gremlin Knob or Lagavulin fight or something like that, because the damage that it provides in those fights is just not high enough to be relevant, I don't think. I don't know. I would take it over skipping a lot of the time, probably, but I wouldn't take it over something like a Backstab or a Dash. There's absolutely no chance in hell, and I'd be hard-pressed to take it over like even a Dagger Spray if I had to fight against Gremlin Knob and survive, potentially. Took a Crippling Cloud and a Deadly Poison. Alright. So, this deck is a Snecko Eye Poison deck, basically, is how I would describe this deck. Ended up with Dead Branch too. This deck is a fucking nightmare to try to explain why it's strong. Silent decks do not conform to, like, you make a pretty deck where all of the cards do the same thing. Silent decks are, I've said this before, but I'll say it again, they're a lot of filler cards so that you can stack your deck full of powers, which make your output in later turns better without you having to draw all of them on the same turn. And then there are a lot of, like, cards which are pretty good at blocking. Like this deck has a Footwork Plus and 5 copies of Dodge and Roll, which is pretty good at blocking. And then some convoluted concoction of cards which deal some damage. Silent just sort of struggles to deal damage in a focused way, and so unless you get the absolute dream combination of cards which synergize together perfectly, in most of your runs you're just like adding a bunch of cards which are sort of good at it and hoping that they add up to enough. So this deck has 2 copies of Corpse Explosion, which gets us a ton of AoE damage, and that's basically enough with the Deadly Poison and the Crippling Cloud to add extra poison damage. And like a Caltrops Plus to get us through Act 2. Bullet Time plus Snecko Eye, immensely strong combination. You draw 7 cards, they cost anywhere between 0 and 3. You play Bullet Time, they all cost 0. You get to play all of them. Dead Branch, always a very, very, very strong relic. No different here at all. Yeah. Took 20 damage against Donu Deka, and then 83 damage against Awakened One, going to 4 hit points. It's not a particularly strong deck. It's not very good at blocking at all, and it doesn't have a Malaise for Awakened One. If we had a Malaise for Awakened One, would have felt more confident there, but this is another run where every single little thing that the deck had ended up mattering. Worth pointing out, like, Tools of the Trade, this card doesn't have to go in your deck when you see it. I generally do not take this card. I think I ended up taking this card because I got a Bird Face turn or something, maybe, and then because I have a Tools of the Trade, I ended up with a Reflex Plus and a Tactician as well. I forget exactly how this came to be, but Reflex Plus, Tactician, Tools of the Trade, these are not cards which are usually in my Silent decks, but they end up working together well enough that I ended up with them. Makes it harder to beat Awakened 1 when you're giving Awakened 1 2 strength to play Tools of the Trade, which doesn't actually do very much on its own. Alright, we got a Leg Sleep, Deadly Poison, Dodge and Roll, Noxious Fumes. So our deck turned into Block and Poison very early on in this run. Block and Poison works great on Ascension 0 and is sort of terrible in Act 2 on Ascension 20. So we still have to work out some way to beat Act 2. And we did that by lifting. So we took all of the poison damage cards and then took +2 strength from floor 13 and 15 campfires, which is sort of funny because poison cards don't benefit from +2 strength at all. We got a Snecko from the Act 1 boss though, and this is a 3 energy Snecko run in the end. We got a Bullet Time for that interaction again. This time we did have Malaise. We have a Wraith Form Plus and a Nightmare. We've talked about why those cards are so strong together, and a well-laid plans to make sure that we can get those off together. So this is another deck which just manages to block with Nightmare, Wraith Form, and Malaise. These are very good ways to mitigate, and then puts together some sort of damage somehow. You'll note that even though I took some great poison cards early, this deck is not a deck which is full of poison cards, really. We took a Pandora's box, so some of these cards are just messy. Like the 2 unupgraded Banes are because we transformed into them with Pandora's box, for example. But we've got Snecko sort of package of cards. Bullet Times are good with Snecko. Acrobatics is great. Sneaky Strikes are great as long as you have the critical mass of stuff like Acrobatics. These are very good cards with Snecko. Yeah. And then we've got the Malaise, Nightmare, Wraith Form, 3 copies of Footwork Plus to actually survive. Took 46 damage against Time Eater and 36 against Awakened 1 to end up at 32, or 32 against Awakened 1 to end up at 36. Pantograph here is doing a lot of work keeping us healthy through the boss fights. I have more Silent Winds than Ironclad Winds too. Oh god. Alright, so Dagger Throw, Terror, super early Terror, all out attack. I don't love Terror super much because so much of Silence damage is not attack focused, and also because enemies have artifact charges or there are fights where it's AoE and stuff. Terror doesn't end up dealing all that much damage all that well always, but it's pretty good against Gremlin Knob and Lagavulin, and pretty good against Guardian, and there are enough fights where it's very good that I think it's okay to take one sometimes in the right spot. Bought a Footwork, got an Infinite Blades, upgraded an Infinite Blades, and got a Duvu Doll for early strength. I think there are 9 powers which are very good with shivs, or 9 relics rather, which are very good with shivs, and Duvu Doll counts as one. Vajra counts as one as well. This deck ends up having a Malaise and Nightmare and 5 apparitions, and that's how it's blocking, and then it has a weird concoction of damage. I don't think this deck was very good at dealing damage. We bought a Twisted Funnel, I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure that's from Astoria. Yeah, you can only purchase that. But this deck just wasn't very good at dealing damage, and so we were desperate for finding some way to deal some. Got the Well-Laid Plans plus the Finisher going on again to try to set up a big Finisher turn, although I don't think this deck was all that good at doing that. And an Apotheosis. Apotheosis is quite often quite good in silent decks. It's another power that you play at some point during your rotation through your deck, and it upgrades your entire deck for the rest of the fight. This is a Vajra Shuriken Kunai run. So, yep. Yeah, you're probably going to win those if you know that these create cards which attack. That's basically the extent of what you need to know to win a run where you get Vajra, Shuriken, Kunai. Sometimes you just get a really good combination of relics. Skipped out maneuver, deflect Bane. Bane's just not a very good card. Took a Fire Potion Quick Slash from a store to make sure that we could win fights. Got another Terror early. Beat Lagavulin and got Shuriken, opened a chest and got Kunai. And this run is basically already over. Want to note that Dodge and Rolls scales very, very well with Dexterity. That's the block card that you really, really want with Kunai on top of Cloak and Daggers. So Cloak and Daggers and Dodge and Rolls with Kunai, Blade Dance, Execulant with Shuriken, double after image as well. Double after image plus, so these are innate. After image is one of the best upgrades in the game. It's sort of hard to judge because after image is the same when it's unupgraded, except that upgrading it makes it innate, so you get it on turn 1. But yeah, especially if you have 2 backstabs in your starting hand, like getting after image into play on turn 1 is just really, really important. It's one of the strongest powers in the game, and having it turn 1 is way better than having to wait until turn 4 or 5 to get it. So that's why we're upgrading after image in a deck which doesn't have many upgrades. And then Blade Dance and Cloak and Dagger are the other big upgrades to get our Shurikens and Kunai's proccing. What did this copy in this deck? Bouncing Flask? Malaise? Oh, I think it copied Malaise. Okay. So, we skipped a Quick Slash? What? That's wrong. Poison Stab, Bouncing Flask, Ghost in the Jar, Bronze Scales, Flood Gremlin Knobbing, or Crippling Cloud. So we got some poison stuff going. Did I skip a Quick Slash? Oh, I think maybe my Whale bonus was a card choice and I already had a Quick Slash. That's the only thing I can think of. I can imagine being like, I don't really need 2 Quick Slashes right now. Basically managed to just barely get through Act 1 here. Very, very, very barely. We had 24 health going into a Slime Boss fight with a deck which really isn't that good against Slime Boss. Got a Malaise from the Slime Boss fight and a Hovering Kite. So Hovering Kite's a very, very interesting energy relic. The start of your turn, you gain an energy and discard 2 cards. Endless Agony is great with Hovering Kite, talked about that a little bit earlier. Infinite Blades is actually really good with Hovering Kite because you can discard the Shiv. And there are going to be a lot of fights where discarding Shiv is not that big a downside. The next time you draw it, well, for one, you have Hovering Kite, so you have to discard 2 cards every turn anyway. So if you draw your Shiv that you discarded a while back, you just discard it again if you don't want it. But also, a lot of the times, the fight will be over by the time that you draw it again. Got an Acrobatics and a Backflip to get a little bit more card draw to make sure that we could spend 4 energy. And then we bought a Dahlia's Mirror from a shop to copy our Malaise. And Malaise with 4 energy, especially when you have to discard 2 cards every turn, so you might be struggling to find something to spend energy on. This card is strong enough to win runs. We also have a Corpse Explosion, 2 Bouncing Flasks, and 2 Catalysts. So this is the first round where we're seeing the absolute god tier poison damage package coming together. And I've heard people go as far as saying that Catalyst is necessary for winning with Silent Ascension 20. That's pretty obviously not true based on the fact that we've just looked at a bunch of Ascension 20 Silent victories and this is the first time that I've actually had it. I even will usually skip it unless I already have poison damage because I really don't think that it's very necessary, and if you don't have good poison in your deck, it's a bad card, which is going to make it harder for you to win the run anyway. But yeah, this time we did put together the absolute god package of poison damage, and that's going to win your runs. This deck also has a Shuriken and Kunai, which is pretty hilarious. I think I bought Prismatic Shard to meme with. At this point in the run, things were pretty much over. Took 4 damage against Donudaka and 22 against Time Eater. Actually, I went into the boss fights with 35 out of 63 health. Oh my god, what am I doing? It looks like a really bad Act 2 where there just weren't any campfires in the back half of the act, and I never got any sustain relics out of all the relics that I had. Had a Paper Crane too. Ridiculous deck. Alright. So this is a deck where we took Mark of the Bloom. We took Mark of the Bloom here, right? At the Mind Bloom event. We were already at full health and we saw that we had 2 campfires and a merchant. So Mark of the Bloom makes it so you cannot heal anymore, but you upgrade all of your cards when you pick it up. And not being able to heal on this deck did actually sort of suck for the boss fights because we had 4 bite pluses, but well worth it to upgrade all of the cards for sure. And when you see this event, I think people hesitate to upgrade all of their cards to not be able to heal, but even halfway through the act, upgrading all of your cards is very, 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 very strong, and you can consider doing that in a lot of situations. This deck took a leg sweep. You can see that I got way more events than I usually go for early on. Just wasn't a very favorable path. Leg sweep, well-laid plans, dagger spray, upgrade, neutralize. So we go into this elite fight struggling to deal damage and take 0 damage from the sentries. Oh, because I had Niall's Lament. Okay, so I guess it wasn't a problem with the path being bad. It was just that I took a Niall's Lament and went for the 1 HP elites and got sentries and Gremlin Knob at 1 HP. I have a lot of people see 1 HP enemies and be like, hey, can we snipe some elites? That would be really good. It's not that good. It's not that good. Doing this isn't that incredible, because like I said, like this isn't what I want my starting act path to be. I missed a lot of chances to add good common attacks to my deck, and I've been talking repeatedly about how Silent struggles to get through Act 2, and you need some way to deal damage, and you're going to get that from commons, from hallway fights for the most part. So missing out on all of these is a big cost. Plus, we can fight 2 elites on floor 7 and floor 10 anyway. Like, we can beat them if we could just get some hallway fights so we get some damage into our deck. We'll be able to beat them even if they have full health. That's what we're doing in most of these runs. But certainly, it paid off this time. We got a Snecko Skull, Kettle Ball for lots of lifting. We got Bottled Lightning. I think I probably skipped that. Oh, and then we get Finisher and Flechettes. So going back to the Finisher and Flechettes again, when we have a lot of strength scaling, these cards are very good. We ended up with a Runic Pyramid as well. Runic Pyramid's incredible with Finisher and Flechettes because we can hold on to attacks with Finisher for big attack turn, and because we get to hold a bunch of skills and have Flechettes go off with 9 skills in our hand for 54 damage, plus however much strength we're getting. We would have had +3 strength at the start of every fight. Is there anything else big to say about this? I wonder what I took Runic Pyramid over. It doesn't actually tell me. I wouldn't be surprised if I took Runic Pyramid over one of the worst energy relics here. I think Runic Pyramid's very good in this deck when we have Flechettes and Finisher and a lot of plus strength already. So that's a very high quality boss relic. It's easy to see that you're on 3 energy in Act 2 and think that you've got an unlucky, but in this case I would have taken Runic Pyramid over, I would say, like half of the energy relics. I think it's just incredibly, incredibly strong. And we have Malaise, Nightmare, we've got Bouncing Flask, Catalyst, we've got some very, very, very strong stuff here. And the combo nature of stuff like Nightmare and Catalyst, it's not any sort of drawback really when we have a Runic Pyramid, because we can play them on whatever turn we want to play them on. Ended up taking 22 damage against Time Eater and 18 damage against Donu Deka, so we're close. Silent often has pretty low max HP, which can make those fights pretty sketchy. Okay. Energy Potion only from that hallway fight. Backstab, Dagger Spray, Sucker Punch, what? Gremlin Knob, got a Backflip and a Paper Crane. It's cool to be offered Backflip as a card award for Gremlin Knob, because you don't really want a Backflip in your deck for the Gremlin Knob fight, but you sure want Backflips in your deck for Act 2 and 3, and the big threshold where it's like, okay, I can start being really happy to pick up Backflips now, is once you know that you're not fighting Gremlin Knob again in Act 1. Just because it really is such a bad card against Gremlin Knob. Molten Egg, Pentagraph, Flechettes Plus with a Molten Egg. Okay, so we got some cool damage going on with Flechettes Plus. This is a really interesting run. We had to go through Act 2 on 3 energy again. We got a Ring of the Serpent though for more card draw on lots of turns, which works well without Flechettes Plus. Drawing 6 cards per turn helps a lot. Got a Thread and Needle. We did not fight a lot of elites at all in this run. The reason that this deck is able to beat boss fights is that we have 2 copies of Footwork Plus and an After Image. We don't have any sort of intangible, but we also have a Paper Crane. So we're able to weaken things with Crippling Cloud, Neutralize, and 2 copies of Sucker Punch. This is like the most cobbled together Ascension 20 run. We have a Thread and Needle to get us a little bit more block, and then we've got like the Footworks and the After Images, so we just barely have enough block, and then we've got some decent poison damage, and that's how this deck survives. This is like the bare minimum. Pantagraph's really big for having the extra 50 health in these fights as well. I went into the boss fights with less than max HP, which doesn't... Oh no, I had exactly max HP, because I was able to rest up to 45 and then proc Pantagraph. Took 20 from Donu Deka and 15 from Time Eater. which seems really good. I'm surprised that we did that well in those fights, but like, yeah, these relics, especially Paper Crane, do pretty well. We've got Poison Stab, Footwork over another Poison Stab, Piercing Wail. So at that point, I'm already pretty happy with how the deck's doing and happy to take a Piercing Wail. Event, upgrade, neutralize, Wool-Aid plans, Caltrops. I'm not fighting an elite for a really long time in this act as well. That's another reason why I'm happy to take a Piercing Oil there. And Caltrops, we talked about how I'm happy to take Caltrops for Act 2 if I feel comfortable with my Act 3 or Act 1 elite fights. Didn't pick up the relic. Presumably that's like a bottled attack or something, which I just didn't want. Got an Ornamental Fan and a Catalyst off the Sentries. So we had one Poison Stab at that point, I believe. So a little bit interesting to me that I was willing to go in on the Catalyst. I guess it's because of Hexaghost and the fact that we just didn't have enough damage yet, although I already have a Caltrops. But yeah, that's cool. We ended up with a Catalyst deck with a little bit of Poison, Crippling Cloud, Corpse Explosion, Bouncing Flask. Where'd the Poison Stab go? I have no idea. Am I crazy? Obtained Poison Stab? Yeah, I don't know. This deck sort of sucks at blocking. We've got Nightmare Catalyst though, and a Well-Laid Plans to set that up, so this deck kills very rapidly, and this is a deck where we're using the fact that we can kill very rapidly to survive. We got a Kunai right at the end, which is nice, but I think it was less relevant than our speed at winning fights. So we beat Donu deck in 5 turns, and Awaken 1 ended up being 12 turns, but you have to kill Awaken 1 twice, so you expect that fight to take longer. Now this is my sort of deck. Pocket Watch, very, very, very strong relic, very strong early pickup, and then Snecko Eye, and this deck just goes absolutely insane from there. Got the Wraith form, got the Nightmare. Very commonly seeing these two cards together. Very commonly seeing Nightmare in general. I think it takes a while to recognize how many different strong things you can do with Nightmare. And maybe it's a card that's difficult to use properly, but you're seeing it show up a hell of a lot in these winning runs, sometimes without a clear reason why it's particularly good in the deck. You can use this card to just hit like a dodge and roll on a lot of turns and a lot of fights, and then the next turn you have 3 dodge and rolls, and that blocks for you for the next 2 turns after that, and that's really, really strong. There are lots of reasons why you can use Nightmare in a way that's strong, which does not require that you like be Nightmaring or a Catalyst or a Wraith form or something like that. Obviously in this deck we can Nightmare a Malaise, or we can burst a Malaise, or we can Nightmare a Wraith form and have 12 turns of Intangible, but we don't have to. With Snecko Eye, Nightmare gets a lot better too, because if you Nightmare a card that costs 0 right now, the copies will cost 0 for you as well. Assuming that it was randomized with Snecko Eye. That's not true if it costs 0 because of Mummified Hand or something like that. Let's take a look at our how we added damage to this deck. We got a Caltrops, Cloak and Dagger, Deadly Poison, Fear Potion. Didn't take an Eviscerate. I don't love Eviscerate. In fact, I really dislike Eviscerate on Silent. I think it tends not to be so great to spend 2 energy on a single damage. Alright, cool. But then later on in the run, pretty much we're just a Snecko deck with Nightmare, I think. There isn't that much to say about this one. 16 damage against Donu deck, 50 damage against Awaken 1, despite the malaise. We're getting there. We're this month. We got a floor 1 Caltrops, Predator. I'm pretty happy to play Predator. I would much rather have a Predator than a... Oh, this is our most recent Silent one. Cool. I would much rather have a Predator than a Riddle with Holes. They deal basically the same amount of damage, but Predator draws me 2 cards, which means that it's a very good card later on in the game, when I care more about turning energy into card draw and less about turning energy into like 15 damage for 2. Early in the game, that's a really good trade to make. 2 energy for 15 damage, that's like pretty good. Later in the game, that's really bad, because you have like, I don't know, Deadly Poison Plus as one of the worst types of damage that you can be excited about. Also cards like Noxious Fumes, 1,000 Cuts, Caltrops Plus. You know, you just have much better ways to get damage for 2 energy later in the game. But drawing 2 cards for 2 energy is pretty decent later on in the game, because you have like 5 energy per turn maybe, and you want to draw towards your most powerful and impactful cards. So Caltrops Predator purchased a Well-Laid Plans and a Fire Potion, cool, and removed a Doubt from an event. Neutralize, Poison Stab, Dodge and Roll, purchased a Panache. Oh, I remember this run. This was a really interesting run. So this was a very difficult floor 11 store. We had a good amount of gold, and if I remember right, I was looking at like a catalyst or something. There was some very strong, obviously functional way to deal single target damage, and I was looking at my deck, and it already had a Caltrops Plus in it, or it already had a Caltrops at least in it, so it was like, it can beat Book of Stabbing in Act 2, but it didn't have any form of AoE damage at all, and we couldn't proc Panache yet, but it was like, if I can get this deck to the point where I can proc Panache, which is not that hard, it just requires like a Cloak and Dagger, or a Blade Dance, or an Endless Agony, or something like that. If I can get the deck to a point where it can proc Panache, it can beat Act 2 Elites. And the like binary switch, which flips on when you can beat Act 2 Elites, makes your run so much stronger, especially at Ascension 20 where you need your run to be strong. If you can go kill Act 2 Elites, you get like 3 more relics than you would have otherwise, and those 3 relics can absolutely make the difference between winning and losing. And I'm even underselling it, because Elites have card rewards, which have a higher chance of giving you rare cards as well. And you don't have to fight the hallway fights in Act 2, and the hallway fights suck in Act 2, but you get to take elite fights over them. So I ended up buying the Panache and the Anchor. Both of these are very good for Act 2 elite fights. In all of the Act 2 elite fights, you can get attacked for quite a lot on turn 1, and Panache is very good against the Tri-Slavers and Gremlin Leader. And then it was very difficult to actually turn the Panache on. But we got a Liquid Bronze as well and upgraded our Caltrops, so we were incredible against Book of Stabbing. And then we managed to get an Adrenaline over Wraith Form and Nightmare against Hexaghost. I've been talking so much about Wraith Form and Nightmare tonight. Just this deck blocks with Wraith Form. This deck has Nightmare, which makes the strong cards. You have 3 more of them, etc., etc., etc. Really cool to see a run where I took Adrenaline, because it turns on that Panache, because it lets me fight Act 2 Elites, because that puts me in a situation where I know that I can safely get through Act 2 and sets me up to have a stronger deck in terms of relic base for later in the run. You can't just play this game picking from a list of cards or like, this is the strongest one, I always pick it. You've got to look at what's coming up in the run and what different things let you do. And so buying Panache and then getting Adrenaline over these 2 very powerful cards from this boss reward is a really creative and cool way to see that happening in this successful run. None of the relics are that incredible. It's just like an okay deck. We got 5 energy, which in this deck was good. In this deck, Philosopher's Stone was better than skipping. That's not always true, but in this deck we've got like a backflip and a well-laid plans and enough cards that cost at least 1 energy that we were able to spend 5 energy profitably every turn. It also helps us proc Panache, I guess, having a 5th energy. Took 15 damage over 14 turns against Time Eater. That's pretty good. 38 over 10 turns against Donudeka. So the deck definitely got there without needing apparitions or anything like that, and largely that's because our deck was able to go through Act 3 or Act 2 aggressively. Okay, so those are my silent wins. I'm gonna talk about my defect wins next. I'm gonna do these all back to back to back, but I'm gonna take a little bit of a break to give my voice a rest. And so you can look forward to hearing me sum up some defect wins from Ascension 20 next time. I think the big takeaway from looking at these silent wins is there are repeating patterns in how Silent can successfully create enough mitigation to survive long enough on Ascension 20 for like any sort of damage, really. Any sort of thrown together Silent damage package to deal enough damage to win the run. There's like one very, very, very powerful way for Silent to deal damage with like the Catalyst plus Poison thing, and I think that showed up in one of these runs. more commonly, the way that I am winning on Silent is I'm getting enough mitigation for just any old damage cards to basically add up to be enough to win the run. And Silent has a number of ways to get that much mitigation. It's easier, I guess, to pick damage cards which are functional on their own and get you through Act 1 and enable you to beat Act 2 elite fights by like turn 6 or whatever. Pick those because those are the early challenges for you, getting through the Act 1 elite fights, getting through the Act 2 elite fights, and Catalyst can be a really bad card in those situations if you don't have the poison to support it yet, or if you draw it before your poison cards or something like that. And look for one of the ways to get enough mitigation to get you through Act 3 and maybe the Act 2 boss fight, because that's the first time that starts to become a relevant concern. And that means that you have an entire 2 acts to try to set that up, whereas you need to get your damage base going straight away. So I think that's like the big takeaway, I would say, in how to position yourself to be building winning Ascension 20 Silent decks. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this chat, and I will see you next time for Defect. Bye-bye.